This episode of Faces of Grand Prairie podcast is brought to you today with the help of these wonderful local business sponsors. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast so you won't miss any of the upcoming great interviews. My Jennarocity Estate Sales has been providing estate liquidation services in Grand Prairie since 2015. They are a trusted member of the Grand Prairie community and a proud affiliate of the Arlington Board of Realtors. Jennarocity Estate Sales specializes in helping adult children through the emotionally difficult process of liquidating a loved one's estate and helping seniors downsize for their next phase of life. To find out more about their services or follow their upcoming sales, go to mygenerosityestatesales.com. Coffee News is a weekly publication delivered to restaurants, coffee shops, hotels, and anywhere people go to have a bite to eat or wait for service. Everything in Coffee News is fun and entertaining. It is a breath of fresh air for millions of readers tired of hearing only bad news. Coffee News is always positive. At Coffee News of Grand Prairie, their mission is to help small and medium-sized local businesses grow with affordable, exclusive advertising. This means that your ad is being viewed every day. Coffee News editions are placed in businesses where people are waiting for food and service. The distribution locations are chosen carefully to ensure you have the largest viewing audience. With exposure 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, your ad reminds current clients and customers to return to your business for products or services while constantly creating interest for potential new clients or customers. Go to coffeenewsgp.com to learn more. Mansfield Driving Academy is Mansfield's oldest driving school, serving the Grand Prairie, Mansfield, Arlington, and Kennedale areas since 2009. Their state-approved curriculum has been designed for maximum learning and designed to meet students where they are at. They offer both online and in-person classes for the convenience of their students and provide in-car lessons for both learning options. They are a DPS road test site and offer in-person testing options so you don't have to wait in line at the DMV. To find out more about their course packages, visit their website at mansfield-drive.com. Jenna Pecor is a Realtor with Bancroft Realty and a proud member of the Arlington Board of Realtors. She's been helping people with their real estate goals in Grand Prairie for over 10 years, with a specialty in liquidating the estates of seniors. In today's real estate market, you need an agent with negotiation skills and experience with current market trends who'll be able to confidently guide you through your transaction. Jenna is that Realtor who can make it happen for you one step at a time. Call Jenna at 214-558-4410 for a free consultation if you're thinking about buying or selling a home. And now, on to our episode. Mark.
Welcome.
I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you so much.
Well, tell everybody who you are and why you're here today.
Okay, my name is Mark Ford. I'm an insurance agent here in the state of Texas. I'm also licensed in Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Arkansas. Primarily, my agent practices what they call P&C insurance.
I'm going to move the mic just a little bit closer to you.
Sorry, I wave when I talk.
No, I know. Same. I have to literally sit here like this, if you'll notice.
I'm going to hold the mic. No, so we essentially we're what we call a property and casualty insurance agency. So we cover all the things you might think about, which would be home, auto, life, business, and on down the line. So the biggest reason I'm here today is to try to answer some questions for you that you might have about insurance. It's going to be very non-specific to any particular carrier. And I'm actually doing a presentation tomorrow in front of a large group of realtors talking about homeowners insurance.
Are you?
Yep.
Well, then it's timely.
Yes, yes. A little shout out to the Metro Tex Realtors Group. That's
who
I'm going to be talking with tomorrow morning.
I'm a member of that board and also the Arlington board. So we just got back from Austin Wednesday. We went down to do our Realtor Day at the Capitol. Talking about property taxes mostly, but yeah, I had you on because for the same reason, because I'm a real estate agent also. And your colleague, Dan, is a part of a networking group that I'm a part of. And I said, I really need to have somebody on to talk about some of the things going on with insurance. I know it's on everybody's mind, especially if you're buying or selling a house. And if you are seeing some of those prices escalate, and there's, concerns about all these natural disasters we've been having lately.
Yes.
And so I'm glad you're here, and I appreciate you taking your time. I was telling you before the podcast, I don't normally have a list of questions. Normally it's just a flow, but I wanted to make sure that I touched on some of these things so that we can, address some of the stuff that I'm hearing. So I sent you a list of questions before, but I want to make sure I take notes just in case.
That's fantastic, because I can get lost in the weeds pretty easy.
So can I. Matter of fact, you were telling me something, and just to take a detour right in the beginning, you were telling me something that was interesting about your past employment history. So you were saying, I asked you if you'd ever record a podcast. You said no, but what did you say that you had to?
Very early in my career, and I'm talking very early for a lot of people who are listening, I was in the military for 7 years. I was down in the Houston market.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you. And as part of that, I worked for a small cable interconnect company called Cable Image TV. And at that time, what we did is I literally was a salesperson, a sound person, a camera person, and on-air talent at exactly the same time. And I would travel from business to business and talk to them about commercials on TV, and literally take the videotapes and go to an interconnect site and connect those. So in 1988 and 89, I was running around Central Texas talking to people about these new networks, one of them being MTV, and explaining to people what MTV was all about, and that they may or may not get it, but their kids definitely will.
It's kind of like Back to the Future, where he's like, you might not like it, but your kids are going to love it when he's playing all that music at the very end.
Yeah, no, it was a blast. I had a good time. I've been a salesperson essentially ever since I got out of the military. Worked for a couple of Fortune 50 companies, worked for private equity for a few years in the risk and safety management and operations side. And then actually started my insurance agency around the time that COVID hit. What a great time to start a business.
Really?
Yes.
So you were doing sales for what up until that point?
Well, I had worked for PepsiCo for almost 23 years.
Oh, okay.
In a number of roles across the country. And then after that, was recruited away to private equity and worked in the waste industry, helping people set up their supply chain and operations groups. Basically folding smaller companies into a larger group. So that exposed me to a lot of what comes up with insurance. Accidents happen, injuries, work, and so on. And at the time COVID hit, I had 16 states I was responsible for. So I was constantly in the air all the time. And literally when COVID hit, I rented a car to get back home and said, you know what, I think I'm done with traveling.
Wow.
And I had already started down the insurance travel. And this was back before, say, 2019, I guess we'd say. I'd already started that journey in studying for my insurance license and everything, because I wanted to understand what the insurance industry was telling me as a representative for the business that I was working for.
Oh, right. So, wow, what a time.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that got into real estate, like things in real estate during COVID too. And I was just talking to somebody that it's a lender, and she, and also a title company. And they were like, I don't know what a normal market's supposed to look like, because I've never been a part of a normal market before. And she's right. And so, just kind of going into that a little bit, it's like home prices already just went up really, really high. Yeah. And so we have that because, and the market that we're in is just so not natural. It's not like it was every year there was a growth in the equity of your house. I was doing going back over about 10 years, and I was looking from year to year. Mm-hmm. And it was like, usually houses appreciate about 10% year over year. During 2022, it was like 60%. Yeah. Like literally overnight, home prices just went crazy. And as a result of that, property taxes increased, and then also premiums on insurance increased. Yes. And so I'm getting a lot of questions about that. The property tax. So for anybody that's not a homeowner, if your mortgage payment is your actual mortgage and interest that's going to your actual that part of your sales, but the other side of it is the property taxes and the insurance, and those are the two that can fluctuate, and that can make your home mortgage go up higher. So if you have increase in the amount of replaced value and how much your house is going to cost to replace, those two little items are a part of your mortgage payment, can really go up. So absolutely. Are you getting a lot of calls about that? Is that?
We do. And I'll give you a perfect example since you brought up COVID. I'm getting ready to do the meeting tomorrow with the Metro Tex folks, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
basically going to be talking about homeowners insurance. And as I was researching it, there's a website for anybody that's watching this podcast. It's called Texas Department of Insurance, TDI.gov. And it has all kinds of things that'll put you to sleep, like actuarial tables and all those things. But
What do you mean? That's very exciting. No, I'm just kidding. For some, possibly.
one of my degrees was in statistics, so I like numbers.
Oh, you like that, yeah.
But at the end of the day, one of the things that I realized is I went back and looked at the last 15 years of the average insurance claims cost each year, and what we saw in Texas specifically is it was hovering right around 650 million or so a year that would be going out. And when you have a major weather event, we have other things like, welcome to North Texas,
Mm-hmm.
Hail and windstorms and so on. You had fires in the Panhandle. California's had what it's had over the last couple of years.
North Carolina,
you name
Florida,
it, Florida,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
you name it. But what was interesting is up until 2019, you typically the year was probably about 652 to 670 million in costs for insurance across the state, and then it jumped. We went up to 1.2 over the last several years, so it's almost doubled.
And this, you're talking about claims that people have made.
Cost of claims, yes.
That homeowners insurance and auto, or
it's all insurance in general.
Okay.
Homeowners makes up about, I think it's 43% of total insurance costs in Texas. Okay. Healthcare is usually the largest bucket of insurance that comes into play. But specifically around homes, we've seen those costs just go astronomically high. And a lot of that has been weather related. I mean, Texas is what Texas does, and we have windstorms, we have hail, and so on. But the costs for those went up at the same time that cost of labor and cost of materials went up as well. And that's what most people get a little tired of hearing from us on the insurance side is it costs more to do it. Quite frankly, we'll dip into auto real briefly. Right around the latter part of 2020 and early part of 2021, insurance in a lot of cases was actually writing off cars that had body damage from accidents.
Yes, I saw that, yes.
Yeah, well, basically because body shops were closed down, they couldn't bring people in during COVID, or parts supply chain from wherever it was coming around the world really drove those costs up. So insurance at that time was saying, well, what typically would take a month possibly to do a repair in a vehicle was taking months and months and months. And then the materials sometimes weren't even showing up. So insurance was kind of forced into a box where they had to actually write off vehicles that 2 years ago, it still probably would have been a fairly expensive repair, but it would have been repairable. But because of people not being able to get to work for COVID, cost of materials and so on, there was a window of about a year there where you just couldn't get a car replaced. And you saw that in new car sales too.
Sure.
So it was a big chance. So weather has a ton involved in that. But previous to 2020, I think the biggest year we saw in costs in Texas was a 950 million or so.
Wow.
And we're talking billions now that the cost that they've seen have gone through that. And unfortunately for all of us, when you talk about insurance, you're paying for your insurance, but you're also paying for the total cost of insurance as well. That's how people take a look at insurance. And in general, they say how likely is a risk to come up with X amount of cost or X amount of repair. So see, I told you I can get the weeds really quick.
No. I think that's really interesting because I think one of the questions I had on here was like how much of insurance is local to like a region and how much is the cost like drift over from state to state to state. So like would the things happening in California, like the fires, would that affect the price of premiums here?
Well, it affects the cost of an insurance company's ability to do business because they have extra amount. There's a portion of insurance that's called reinsurance. So any insurance company has to have a certain amount of reserves to get a favorable credit rating or a favorable insurance rating. Otherwise, it costs them more to insure customers. So that comes into play, but it's very specific to region. If you look at, let's just talk about Texas. That's the one I'm the most familiar with. There are parts of Texas that are more likely to wind and hurricanes. There are parts of Texas that are more likely or more tendency to have wildfires and those types of things. But the majority of Texas is subject to hail, especially North Texas. And what a lot of people saw in the North Texas region, and when I say North Texas, let's just say Waco to the Oklahoma border for the most part. Some people argue that that's Central Texas, but
it's all about to be a part of the same anyways.
Exactly. but the reality is that you have that corridor that comes up through that side. And anytime you watch a weather station, they show you this side of Texas, not so bad on the weather. On this side, there's a lot of rain or a lot of hail or a lot of wind. So that does drive claims a lot more. Other things that get factored into insurance are also going to be crime statistics, those types of things in a particular area. So if there's more likely, obviously we all know about weather, and weather is one of the biggest drivers of cost for insurance in Texas. But then there's also areas that are more or less likely to have a higher crime rate or more or less likely to have infrastructure challenges that come into that. Mm-hmm. So it definitely does dial into a particular region. So you have kind of the macro of the U.S., but then what you and I are looking at for the most part is Texas, and more specifically North Texas. Mm-hmm. And then we're looking at the things that come into play on those costs when they're taking a look at it, which is going to be weather, it's going to be neighborhood statistics, and whether that's crime or consumerism, those types of things.
Yeah. And with auto, the kind of cars that you're seeing, I remember when I moved to Plano and my premiums went higher because you just have more Lexuses and Mercedes and some of these other more expensive. So if I was to get in an accident, but I just remember I was like, I didn't even think about that when I moved up there. But so in terms of coverage, I mean, are pretty much are all insurance companies somewhat state by state, or did they, how do they decide what gets covered, what state gets covered?
Well, that's when you get down to that regional discussion. Mm-hmm. So you have general coverages. Like if you're talking about homeowners, they typically cover your dwelling, mm-hmm. the fire, which is the structure of the building. And then there are sub portions of that where they'll say separate structures, which covers your fence, your pool, your shed, mm-hmm. your detached garage, those types of things. But really it comes down to what is happening in that particular region that they take a look at. And they will literally go down to zip code and streets and areas.
So they can say, yeah, that's when I mean coverage, so they can say and decide we're not going to cover this region.
Yes.
So how does that happen a lot? Is it a fluctuating?
It does.
Okay.
And what you'll see is there's almost always somebody that's able to insure that area.
Okay.
But there are companies that will have a higher risk tolerance, but that also means that it's going to cost a little bit more. So they're saying, hey, we know that there's a likelihood of higher claims amounts or higher claim I'm losing the word, mm-hmm. But higher likelihood of claims in that particular area. So the insurance companies, unfortunately, have to be able to stay solvent as a business to be able to insure the people that they do insure. So in some cases, that means that they have to restrict the coverages that they're going to be able to offer in a particular area because they think it's too much of a risk for what they're doing.
Was 2019 when we had the hurricane hit that flooded Houston?
I want to say it was 18 or 19. I'm trying to remember.
I wonder if that had anything to do with the increase of claims.
Well, it would, specific to that. And you also have, for anybody that's on this podcast is anywhere near a coastal area, it's very likely that in those areas they have to have not just your homeowners, but you also have to have a version of TWIA, mm-hmm. Which is wind coverage. And then there are also flood zones throughout the state, depending on elevation and water and so on. So there are a lot of things that come into play with that.
Yeah, my friend is an agent in Rockport. And so we were just talking about this the other day. Her husband, I interviewed him for the podcast after that whole thing happened because he runs the airport down there. Ooh, so he was in charge of all that when that happened. And but I mean, as a real estate agent, that flood in Houston affected it created a new form that we had to fill out for everyone in the state of Texas. It was a flood form. You had to disclose whether your house had flooded. Mm-hmm. And then I started seeing a lot more flood areas where people had to get flood insurance that they didn't have to get flood insurance before. And so for a real estate agent, sometimes these things pop up mm-hmm. and you don't know that they just popped up. And so part of the reason, like I was selling this particular house in terms of flood insurance, I had sold them the house and then we were selling the house. So it was a period of about 2 years. Well, when we sold them the house,
the characteristics of that house changed.
They did. Yeah. It's like all of a sudden you're like, I didn't know you were in a floodplain. Now you're in a floodplain. What makes this different than before? Yeah. And so along those same lines, talking about roofs, I just had a situation where I had a house in Farmers Branch, and they were the buyer was gonna they weren't able to find an insurance provider that was going to cover this particular type of shingle. The house itself was like, I think the roof was like 12 years old. It was performing fine, but it was this shingle. And they were concerned. And I was like, when did this pop up? Like, this was in October. So that kind of sparked a lot of these conversations for me. And people right now are struggling with roof coverage. Mm-hmm. And so talk about that a little bit. What are some of the things that have changed in terms of coverage for roofs in Texas? And are there any houses that are not being covered or more difficult to find coverage for than others?
I would probably, I'll answer in reverse. I would say more difficult to cover. Pretty much every house is coverable as long as it's, a safe piece of property. But depending on the characteristics of that property, there might be some risks in there in trying to cover it. So the insurance companies have to take a look at that. To talk about what you're talking about, I know, let's just say as little as 7 or 8 years ago, the average homeowner's policy, you saw a 1% deductible on the house, and the roof was replacement cost until 15 or 20 years, depending on the age, depending on the carrier. Over the last several years, because of storms and other things that have come into play on that, it's more common now to see a 2% deductible on a home, and in some cases even higher.
Yep.
And part of that is, and I'm not speaking about a particular insurance company, but it's more about the insurance company needing to share risk with the consumer, because the bottom line is that even though none of us likes paying a high deductible, they are necessary. And it covers a certain portion of your roof. And if it costs you a roof that cost $10,000 a year ago or several years ago, now probably costs $15,000 to $20,000 to replace. So the costs of that have doubled. It's not just necessarily an insurance thing. But more specifically to what you were talking about too, is the frequency and severity of storms that we've seen have been a lot more, or at least a lot more in the news and a lot more visible to people in the last several years. So a lot of carriers now are looking at what they call guaranteed replacement cost up to a certain age of your roof. And it's a little different for each insurance company. So I would encourage anybody listening to this podcast, read your policy or do what I do with all of my customers. I encourage them to call me and we will walk through when that happens. Because at some point, you may transition from guaranteed replacement cost to what they call scheduled roof or actual cash value, which means each year you have slightly less coverage until you replace the roof. And that's because the roof does get older. I mean, I've seen roofs that have been on a house for 25, 30 years, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with them. And I've seen one 2 blocks away that had a 3-year-old roof, but it got hammered in a hailstorm.
Right.
So unfortunately, when you're talking about statistics and the averages across insurance, you have to look at a fairly large sample size of homes in a particular area and say, how likely is it for this roof to be a total loss? And that's where insurance or anybody else is going to take a look at that and say, okay, that's a higher risk or a lower risk for different reasons. And then they make the adjustments accordingly. But the 3 most significant things I've seen in the last 5 years is that deductibles have gotten higher in general. And roof cost repair and replacement has gotten much higher, partly because of labor ability and definitely because of materials ability. And then last but not least is just the severity, the storms that we've seen coming through on that as well. And every carrier, regardless of the name of the carrier and how much they're covering your home for, they've had to take a very serious look at saying, if we are receiving $2,500 a month or so for, let's just say, for home policy, and we have a $30,000 roof replacement cost, how long is it going to take for that insurance company to at least break even with the cost of covering that roof? So the reality is if it's going to take you 20 years to make back what you had to do to replace the roof, it's very likely that roof is probably going to be damaged or need to be replaced 1 or 2 more times. So while none of us likes to hear that, I'm a consumer as well.
Yeah.
I can remember a day when the insurance on my roof was a fixed dollar amount, and then it was a low deductible, and over time the deductible has gone up a little bit higher.
So do you, it's always interesting to me to have this conversation about insurance because so I'll give you an example. My parents and their next door neighbors, side by side. Now, the types of roofs that they had, the square footage of the house was pretty similar, but my parents' roof literally was a slope, one slope.
Okay.
The other one had a lot of slopes.
Complex roof.
Yes, it was a complex roof.
Yeah.
But the difference between the two was like $30,000, which seems insane when you think about it. You're like, how is there this much of a discrepancy between what one company and another company would charge? Is there anything about the insurance, the way that we do pay for the roof, that is encouraging these prices to not come back down? Like, it's almost like when you think about health insurance, like they the consumer themselves is not the one paying that bill. Like when you have, like, let's say your health insurance company does a $30 deductible for your doctor's visit. Well, that doctor's visit could go from $100 to $200 to $300. You're still
And
paying the $30.
Correct.
So it's like, is that amount going higher because the insurance company is still paying it? Or would the consumer, if they were directly paying it, would it make it stabilize at a better, you know what I'm saying? I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, I think it does make sense. I think the best example I can give is almost exactly what you just said. Is we're used to a fixed amount, whether it's a deductible or a copay for your roof or for your car or for the doctor. You have there's going to be an expense. So, for example, I have a doctor's appointment later on this week. I know how much my copay is going to be. I know my doctor makes a lot more than that.
Right, exactly.
So the difference between this and that is what insurance is going to be paying for them to go and do that. So part of the reason we see our rates go up, it doesn't matter if it's home or auto or life or health, is the insurance companies are experiencing that cost go up.
Right.
And they're still trying to make the deductibles, even though we could argue, and I'm a consumer once again, we could argue, hey, why is my deductible higher? Why is my copay higher for my health insurance? But when you look at the difference between what that bill was a few years ago and what it is now, it's very, very different. And I think a lot of that does tie back to, I don't like to overuse COVID. I think it's been kind of used a lot. But it kind of set a new benchmark for, hey, this is what it takes to find qualified individuals to do that type of work. So this is the labor it's going to cost a company. It doesn't matter if you're a roofer, a nurse, a truck driver, a police person, fire person. At the end of the day, to get a qualified candidate to do that, you have to pay more now than you did before. And we all, as consumers and employees, every year, we expect a raise. That's, we want a little more paycheck the next.
Well, and roofs and surgery and all these things that are kind of like, if I go to the store and I'm going to buy milk, I know what to expect milk to cost.
As long as you don't try to buy eggs.
As long as you don't try to buy eggs. But again, this is a great example because eggs went up exponentially high, like almost overnight. Yeah. And everybody that directly buys eggs knows that is too expensive. That's more expensive than and so there had to be something that happened to get it up high. But it's not going to stay that way because consumers are the ones directly paying for those eggs, and they have been yelling about the cost of eggs. Yeah. So I went to Aldi yesterday. It's $3.98. It almost got up to $6 at one point in time. So it's going back down. Right. But as a consumer, this is how much eggs are supposed to cost. We anticipate that it goes up a little bit. With roofs or surgeries or all these things, there's no price list. It's not like how much my roof is supposed to cost. So is there any, and trust me, I'm a real estate agent. I'm not going to badmouth roofers. I deal with roofers all the time. But is there any of that's like, we're charging this because we can, and there's nothing trying to bring that cost down? Yeah. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, no,
I don't know.
I would. Well, I'm going to give you the short answer is, if we had to pay for everything 100% without any copays or deductibles,
right,
I would
of
imagine
course
the cost of those would be lower. Because, for example, I had a claim on my roof. It was $40,000 to replace my roof. Did I pay $40,000? No. But if I had to pay $40,000, would I be able to? Maybe not, as the average consumer. So that's why people you're kind of making a regular payment for your insurance, whether it's health or medical or auto or life, assuming that there's going to be a bad day and you need that coverage on that bad day. But to your comment on roofers, I work with a lot of different roofers. There are some fantastic people out there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
The challenge is that they are seeing the same thing that we are seeing as far as finding qualified employees to be able to go out and do the work.
That is very true.
And finding somebody that wants to get up on top of a dark tar-covered roof in August in North Texas.
Yes.
So that's a big piece of it. But then the materials cost for for the shingles and the underlayments and the gutters and trim and all that stuff, that has all gone up. Will it come back down? It may come down a little bit. I can use an example from the industry I was in before when I was working for a private equity in the waste industry. There was a certain amount that people were used to paying for that service, and then COVID happened. And a lot of times we were cutting what they would call a very tight margin at the time. We weren't making a whole lot off of doing that. So when that price went up, the people realized, yeah, that is a valuable thing that I need to pay for. And the cost of materials from our suppliers never really went down. It went down a little bit, but not much. So you kind of have this big, you might be looking at this price on average for a couple of years, and then you have some type of an event that brings it way up. Eventually, at some point, it does go down, but I don't think it ever goes back down to that baseline that you had before. It might sound a little evasive, but that's
no. It's true. And so, do you see a lot of people? I mean, obviously, I'm in real estate, so I see these roof things all the time, and we get more than one bid. So it's like, do you encourage people to get more than one bid?
Absolutely.
Because that'll that'll give you a baseline. I mean, we're closing on a house in a week. There was a huge difference between what one said that they could do it for and the other said that they could do it for. Now, you look at the one that's real cheap and you're like, how can you get it done for real cheap? And it's like,
I might question that a little
yeah,
bit.
it's like,
I'd probably have a real good conversation with the person in the middle.
Right, exactly. But at least that way it gives you some kind of baseline.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah. And one of the things that we advocate within my agency and most of the other agents that I work with is if somebody thinks they need to have a claim, whether it's auto or home or what have you, we always encourage them, call us first. Let's talk about what it is. It's not that we don't want you to do a claim. That's why you pay insurance. And I have no problem processing a claim for somebody to get things started for them if they need it. But the reality is are you getting some competitive bids? Once again, I go back to my previous industry. I used to bid multiple vendors at the same time. We didn't go with the lowest. We didn't go with the highest. We looked at what you call MVP, minimum viable product. So it's like at the end of the day, what's the best for the dollar? I always encourage my customers, and I know that's a question that you have coming up, is how can we help control the cost of our insurance? One of the things is making sure that as dry of a subject as insurance is, as a consumer, I encourage people to ask as many questions as you want.
Yes.
Go home, think about it for the night.
Yes.
Call me back tomorrow with any other questions you forgot to ask.
Yes.
Because there are things you can do to try to control those costs. One of those is exactly what you talked about, where you're getting multiple bids, and any good business person out there is not going to be offended by you doing multiple bids.
That's right.
I know that, the carriers I work with, I have other people that will walk in with a piece of paper and go, they said they could save me $2,000. I'm like, well, let's look at your house, see what you need, and I'll tell you whether or not I'm at that level or higher or lower. Until we do a real good look at what you need, it's hard for me to give you that price.
Right.
And I would do the same thing with a roofer, an auto repair person, a body person, for the car or what have you. And then the other piece of that is taking a look at, going back to what I was talking about earlier, we counsel a lot of folks to try to get a hold of us and talk to us about whatever that situation is before they file a claim. Obviously, if it's an emergency, hang up, dial 911, do what you got to do to make sure that everybody's healthy and safe. But at the end of the day, when you do file claims, that's another thing that does impact cost. If it's somebody that has had multiple claims, either because bad luck or unsafe practices, insurance does look at that too. They look at not a credit report, but basically a consumer report to see how often in the past has a person filed a claim, what has been the severity of the claim, what does their driving record look like, what does their home look like. And you as a realtor, one of the things I always tell people is insurance follows the person. But it also looks at the home. So if I were, and I'm not going to pick out a particular city, but if I were in one city and I had a home, and we're doing a quote for somebody right now, that they had a claim a couple of years ago on their home, and it was a roof claim, and then they're buying another house, they're just relocating for work, they're buying another house, that house did also have a claim, somebody else. But once again, they looked at that house that they were in before, they did have a claim, it was a valid claim. And then this house that they're moving into also had a claim. So the likelihood of that, they were both storm related, the towns are not far apart, the neighborhoods are not far apart. So insurance takes a look at that and tries to consider how likely is it for there to be another claim or for somebody to make another claim. So what I always encourage people to do is, if we need to do a claim, absolutely, it's the right thing to do. You need to get yourself back to where you were. And the lost my language here for a minute. The role of insurance is to indemnify you. So if you have a problem that results in a claim, our job is to get you back to where you were before you had the claim.
Is that what indemnify means?
Yep. So,
interesting.
Yeah. So we're not there to make your house better.
Mm-hmm.
We're not there to make your car fancier, but it's to get you back to wherever you were when that instance happened.
Mm.
So one of the things I always talk with people about is if it is, and you have a deductible, sorry, I kind of drifted a little on you. If you have a claim, you're going to have a deductible. I mean, in some cases, you can have zero deductible on some things, or a very low deductible or a higher deductible, depending on what you choose with your agent. But the other thing is that I always talk with people about is if you're in a position where you can do a minor repair, like a tail light or headlight or something like that, if it's lower than your deductible,
right,
you may consider just doing the repair because it does express a likelihood of you to have a claim. And that's really common on not frequency, but it's a common thing that I see on homeowners policies is somebody had a claim 2-3 years ago with some other carrier and it says it's a $0 claim. That has a big impact on what people are looking at on their insurance. And it could be for any given reason. It could be that it was denied by the previous carrier for whatever reason, or it could have been that whatever their repair was less than what their deductible was. So the insurance company did not pay anything out.
Right.
But they did have a claim. So now what happens with that individual is if you had a repair that was lower than what your deductible was, it's still going to show as a claim and it's still going to be considered by insurance on you and your home. But now what we have to do a lot of times now is file what they call proof of remediation. It says, hey, you filed a claim a couple of years ago. It was a $0 claim. Can you prove that you actually made the repair? Because at that time you're saying something happened that damaged your home.
Right.
And what they want to do, what we want to do is make sure that whatever that was taken care of.
Right. And that as a real estate agent that's going through the sales process.
That's painful.
Well, and I work with a lot of adult children of aging parents. Okay. And so a lot of times I'm working with not necessarily the homeowner for all those years, but their child. So you're trying to, okay, did dad, when he was alive, file a claim 7 years ago and forgot to do, and that's come up before. And you're kind of having to backtrack and you're like, well, I didn't anticipate this obstacle in the sales process. And that's always hard. And so, and I'm working with somebody right now that they didn't file a claim ever for their the entire time that they've had their insurance policy, and they're 96 and they've lived there for, that's crazy. So, it's
crazy good.
It is crazy good. They had a 1%, deductible, which is great. They got grandfathered in. So we ended up getting a new roof, for them. But, what about I'm curious about automobiles. Is any of the complicated nature that they're made, is that affecting the insurance premium on them? They're all computers now. It's it
all comes into play.
Yeah.
I'll give you probably one of the simplest examples to give. When you look at auto, a lot of carriers out there offer what they call a $0 deductible on glass or whatever. You pay a certain flat fee if your windshield gets broken. I'll date myself. I turned 60 a year ago. So at the end of the day, a crack in a windshield was no big deal. You didn't even think about it. And it was $100, $200 to get your windshield replaced. Mm-hmm. Most vehicles after 2016 and even before that with some other vehicles all have now a mirror that has a sensor, the little yellow thing that beeps at you when you're drifting off the lane or something like that, or the backup camera and so on. So now if you have a glass claim on an auto, you're not just replacing the windshield, you're also remounting that mirror, and it generally requires that whoever that person is, whether it's a glass company or a body shop, they have to recalibrate the whole system. Mm-hmm. Because it might be in a slightly different position and throw your sensors off and those types of things. I have a car I love to death, but it has one little glitch that keeps telling me that there's a seat belt or drawing a blank right now, but it's a seatbelt sensor.
Oh,
There's
yes.
nobody in the passenger seat.
I know. When I take my dog goes places with me, and when she gets in the seat, I'm like, gotta buckle the seatbelt. Or when the kids get in the back seat, I'm like, there's nobody even sitting in that seat, but they feel a little bit, So, and you have all these cars with cameras on them. So it's like, my parents were, there was an accident that happened, and it was totaled based on a bumper and one camera. And it was like, how did this happen? But those things are so expensive to replace.
Yeah.
Is that a concern for anybody? Is anybody talking about that? And because it seems like all those things would help make the insurance premiums go down because the cars would be safer
They do while they're working.
So, but to replace them, no.
Yeah. So what I would say is yes, vehicles are much more complex these days than they were before. I drive a modern vehicle now, but my favorite one was built in 1965. That's my favorite one to drive. It's not real complicated for me to work on.
That's right.
But at the end of the day, when you're repairing your car these days, it's not as simple in most cases as I'm changing a tire. I now have to change a tire and a pressure sensor and calibrate it with my dashboard.
Right.
So that's a real simple easy done. But almost everything in a car these days is integrated with something else. So that all has to be taken into factor. And I really feel for the body shop folks because, things have to be within a certain tolerance or they just don't work the right way.
Yeah. Well, it seems like just overnight, it's like, when you have a regulation that comes down about, emissions and things like that, or the backup camera that's required and all that stuff, everything gets affected downstream. It's like, okay, do you have mechanics that can actually work on this? Have you trained them on how to do any of these things? And it's like, especially with COVID, when we had so many people retire, it's like, do we have students that are going to actually be able to work on our cars? That's a big concern.
Oh yeah, you're getting on one of my favorite soapboxes. I'm actually here in Grand Prairie. I'm involved with one of the local schools that has a CTE, continuing education, and that goes back to what we talked about at the beginning of this podcast too. When we talk about cost of materials, labor is a big piece of that because there's a lot of technical training now. And I'm not going to disrespect any of the previous mechanics because they were artisans.
Yes, absolutely.
But now you have to be a technician, a computer programmer, and all these other things to be able to make sure that they work so much more. So replacing or finding that skilled labor, I've got a couple of customers that actually have auto shops and so on. And that's one of the biggest things I hear from them is, just not to sound like the old guy in the room, but kids these days.
Yeah.
It's not kids these days. It's keeping up with the technology. It's keeping up with all the things that have to get done.
Yes.
So yeah, I would say that is probably one of the biggest sticking points now is finding whether you're a roofer, auto person, whatever. There's so much technology in our homes. You're a realtor, about smart homes and all that.
Yes.
There's a whole lot of things now that you have to have a certain amount of technical expertise just to service.
Well, you have to have, when you have that, there's what that little sensor contraption that will tell you what kind of, error you have in the car. So you have to have it plugged up and you have to have it. And so it's like when a mechanic shows up, what I do like is like mechanics are starting to do home visits. And not have the overhead of the actual mechanic's garage. Yeah. But they always bring that little computer thing where they're, because you have that sensor that pops up and you're like, I don't know what that error is for. Yeah. And you have to have something to be able to tell you that. And imagine having to work on all these different kinds of cars that all have different kinds of things. So it's crazy. And I do think that COVID, just losing so many people in so many industries from either people that have passed away or people that were retiring. I do see a push for CTE come back. And I think Grand Prairie does it amazingly well. That's the one I will say Grand Prairie does that better than any city that I've seen. As far as like training these kids to have practical, job knowledge.
Well, I can tell you, I participate in their, we actually just did it a little over a month ago. So I'll shout out to Dubisky High School. They work across.
Dubisky's amazing.
Yeah, they work through a number of different schools with those paths. But they actually have an interview challenge where they have the kids come through and they talk to business owners like myself and others. They interview, they talk about what their plan is. And I feel myself sounding like my uncle. In 5 years, you're going to be different than what you think you are today. You got to think about that. But no, very impressive. What's going through that is not what I went through in high school, which was called shop class.
Right, right.
Totally different.
Yes. Yeah. But it's kind of this. We need that.
It's amazing.
We absolutely have to have that. And so I love seeing, I think part of the market adjusting is seeing less kids maybe go to college for things that are not going to be useful for them and coming out of high school making money. Some of these kids are going to work at Lockheed for like six figures a year immediately after they graduate. And that's a huge deal. So
skilled tradespeople are worth a lot.
They are.
To anybody and everybody.
They are, but you have to be willing to work. But I do see that there's my daughter's 14. I do see a shift in the kids. It's almost like, I don't want to say they're getting bored with phones because that wouldn't be generally speaking, that wouldn't be accurate for everyone, but I do think that they are bored. They're getting to the point where they're ready to use their hands again and feel like they're doing something and accomplishing something. And you can do that with the trades because you see something go from broken to fixed. Yeah. And you can't see that on a TikTok dance video.
And I think a lot of us are realizing that we can't fix our own stuff like we used to.
I know.
Things are not as simple as they were.
I know.
So, and when you marketing 101, you see a lot of things now with the label that says craft made.
Yeah. Yes.
So I think a lot of people are exactly like you're saying. They're, while they're still building technical expertise and all that, I think people are actually finding pride in actually accomplishing something for themselves.
Like physical labor. Yes. Yeah. Yes. So are you seeing like a shift? How do you think that the insurance industry will innovate to correct some of these things? Or what are they talking about to fix some of these problems?
Well, I think you've already seen some of it in almost every major carrier has some type of smart driving app that helps you figure out, how often you're hard braking or accelerating or drifting on lanes or, picking up your phone while you're driving, all those things. I think those all have a big play in it, but I also, and keep in mind, I'm an agent, so I'm not an actuary or a claims adjuster or anything along those lines. But one thing I am seeing is a lot more discussion about helping people understand how to protect themselves in their homes, within their autos, and so on. I know, back in a simpler time, people would say, I see my agent on the way to the grocery store. I pay whatever it is I pay per month, and they take care of me if there's a problem. But one of the things, kind of getting back to one of your, either I pre-read the question or one of the questions that you're about to ask me was, how can we help control or mitigate cost of insurance? Along with roofs, and we talked about the costs and the things that come into play with that, is insurance is actually looking at the overall condition of your total property now. So it's like, do you have branches that are hanging over your roof that are a risk? I've literally seen some cases where we've had a perfectly good house, no problems at all with somebody qualifying for their house or insurance or anything like that. But the feedback that we'll get is after a secondary inspection, which could be done with a drone or it could be somebody physically coming on the property. They're going, well, they've got a mature tree with a very big branch hanging over that nice, pristine $30,000 roof. And if a big windstorm comes in, it will destroy that.
Yes.
So we're actually seeing where people are being encouraged to do a little preventive maintenance on their property.
Yes.
By getting rid of the overhanging branches.
You use that exact example. One of the real estate agents last week that said they lost their insurance coverage because of a tree.
I have seen that. I've seen that happen in other cases. And there are other things where you talk with people. It's like, I love a good trampoline, but that's a pretty risky thing for a couple of different reasons, because people can trip and fall off of them. And then also in Texas with high wind, your trampoline might magically teleport into somebody else's property. That
happened to my sister. She lives in Waxahachie. She had it blew. Yeah.
Well, I live in between Midlothian and Waxahachie, so I live in Mid-Hatchie.
Mid-Hatchie. That's funny.
But we are up in a little bit higher area. There's not a lot of trees, so we get a lot of straight line wind and those types of things. So my wife would happily tell you we had a nice little windmill that you put out in the garden. It now no longer has the wheel. I don't know where that wheel went, but it's gone. So yeah, there's been a lot. Some of it is by insurance pushing the agenda with the consumer and saying, hey, look, we want to make sure that you don't have tripping hazards and limbs hanging over your house, all those things that could contribute to a major loss versus a minor loss. But then the other part is that the positive side is you're also seeing credits for people that have smart homes or monitored security systems, monitored fire systems, you don't see it as much in Texas, but I also do Louisiana and some other places where they have a low water table. Or high water table, where you have water detection devices in the basement or something along those lines. So there's incentives now to make sure that you have good controls in place to keep the potential cost of damage on your house down.
What do you think about shingles were obviously an innovation at one point in time. So do you see, or have y'all talked about any new kind of materials that people are finding for roofs?
So far, everything I've seen is more about improving on the current design. I'm actually going to be going to a couple, while in the state of Texas, roofers aren't required to be licensed. There are trade associations throughout Texas, and they have conventions and trainings and that type of stuff. And I have been fortunate enough to be invited by a couple of roofers to go out there and just kind of hang out and see what they're talking about.
Wait, what did you just say? They don't have to be what?
You do not have to be a licensed roofer in the state of Texas.
Isn't that interesting?
I will leave it at that. I know that most of the roofers I've talked to said they would prefer that there was a license requirement.
And that's going back to when we were talking about comparing the bids. A question I didn't even think about until just right now. Ask how many bids that they've done before. We have these roofers that go around these neighborhoods. So it's like, can I see your last 5 that you've done to see if there's, well, first of all, is there 5? Or did you just get a roofer shirt on today and you're going to.
One thing I can say that is always wise is do your research.
Yeah.
And there are, and I'm not going to stump for any particular company, but there are 5 or 6 nationally ranked associations that contractors, roofers, plumbers, electricians, they can all be affiliated with, and they do background checks and those types of things to try to validate who somebody is. And I don't think the average consumer would do this, but when I meet a roofer, one of the first things I ask him is, where is your office? I'd like to meet you there.
Oh, that's a good question.
I don't know that the average consumer would be able to do that, but as an insurance agent, it's important to me to make sure that that person has not come from out of state with a ladder rack, and they're telling me they've been in the business for 30 years. They may have. There's some very good people that operate off of one truck with a ladder, and they do fantastic work. So I'm not picking on them at all. But as an insurance agent, for me to try to help my customers protect themselves, typically I am only talking to a roofer that I know has a physical business location that I can find. And because of my background, I used to do safety checks on warehouses and that type of stuff. So I'm like, hey, take me on a tour of your warehouse. What does your safety program look like? Those types of things.
That's good questions that you wouldn't think to ask normally.
Yeah. So typically what I would tell a consumer, and it doesn't matter if it's a roofer, electrician, plumber, whatever, any tradesperson that you're going to have work on your house, I would ask 3 main questions. Are you licensed? They don't always have to be licensed in every trade. Do you do background checks on all of your employees? And do you have insurance? Because there's insurance that's called general liability insurance that most businesses have to have. And that if somebody provides a service for you, whether or not it's counseling or physical works or goods, that general liability policy insures you as the consumer if they do something wrong. Not nefarious, nothing bad, but if there's some kind of fault and they are found at fault, that's what their general liability insurance is. So, for example, as an insurance agent, I have what they call errors and omissions, which is it's a version of general liability insurance, which means if I do something wrong, whether it's just through error or omission, I have insurance to protect my consumer if I've done something that I shouldn't have done.
Yeah, real estate brokers have to carry it for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I do a lot of commercial insurance as well. So.
Yeah. Another thing too would be, what are some references, like your most recent reference? One of the things I see so much is flashing problems. Like on an inspection, the flashing is never done well. There's just, what kind of detail did you do to and some roofers do a really good job of that and other ones don't. Did you leave a bunch of screws and nails all over the place? Did you clean up after yourself? Because that can cause a problem with your tire. I think there's all these questions that as consumers, we have to get better at interviewing people. I've had people, I incorporated my business in January, which evidently put me on some list of businesses that are new. So of course I get called constantly from all these people. And it's bookkeepers are one that I've had a lot of people call me about. They want to be, just because you call me and say that you want my business doesn't mean that you automatically should get it. I need to interview you and also be able to tell somebody no. But I think some people, when they get a roofer that comes to their house and insists that they do this work, it's I don't want to say no to them. But we need to be more selective of the people that we're choosing.
Yeah, I would say, and this goes all the way back to my military days and working in logistics and supply chain as well, as inspect what you expect. So at the end of the day, if I'm going to pay somebody to do a job, and I'm not offensive about it at all, but I say, where do you normally do your business? And who are your 5 largest customers? So that way you can ask them about it. And then there are ways, you can love it or you can hate it. You can Google and find things out about businesses and so on. But I also always encourage people to look for accreditations, Better Business Bureau, those types of things. But yeah, you're exactly right. I would say, can you give me a couple of references that I can call and talk about your business? No business owner should be offended by that. If you come at them a little bit weird, you might offend them. But at the end of the day, it's just, hey, I'm getting ready to pay you for a service. I've already decided I kind of want to use you, but I want to check out a couple of things and make sure I'm going to be getting what I expect.
Right.
I'll give you a prime example. There is a roofer I work with. I try not to play any favorites. But
Sure. No.
there's a roofer I work that does a lot of work in the Mansfield market and so on. And one of the best testimonials I can give for that roofer is they actually had something go slightly wrong on their job, but within the next day, the owner of the company, the general manager of the company, and the service supervisor went out, checked it out. And it was a minor thing, but it was something that somebody noticed and they took care of it right away. So I would love to hear those. I'm a big fan of looking at Google reviews. And if I see a 4-star or a 3-star, I'll go and look at that, because sometimes maybe it wasn't perfect, but they did something to fix what happened.
Yes.
That's important to me.
That is very important. Yeah. It's almost better. It's more authentic to see those than just to see constant 5-star reviews.
Yeah.
Because I can go to all my friends and be like, just give me a 5-star review.
Oh, yeah. I've got a database with 25,000 potential leads and several hundred customers that I can send. And we do ask for Google reviews, but I don't just pump them out for no reason whatsoever. But the other part of that, too, is just making sure that make sure that person can tell you what they're going to do on your house. Once again, you're not taking them through the 3rd degree or anything like that, but you can just tell me. So tell me about what you do to prep my site. Tell me about what you're going to be doing.
It's not me.
That's you. In the meeting, they charge you $5 when your phone rings.
No, I can't. I got it. Do not disturb. It's on do not. She must have called me twice.
Yeah, it could be.
Okay, well, I'll put that part out.
No problem. So yeah, just getting back to that, I think asking the 3 questions I talked about earlier is, what kind of background checks do you do? Can you give me some references? And where is your business located? Mm-hmm. And there are very good people that don't have a warehouse. I'm not saying you have to have a warehouse to be a good tradesperson, but just understanding that.
But if you aren't going to have an office, what do you do with your materials? Like, those are good questions. Yeah. How do you transport them? Where do they stay? Because what you don't want is, shingles being, stored somewhere that's not good. And now you have terrible shingles going onto your roof. Yeah. So, I mean, that's a big deal.
And I'm not just picking on roofers. I'm talking about tradespeople in general.
Sure.
It's always good to know where they operate out of, know a little bit about their people. And they should be able to tell you, everything is subject to change, but they should be able to tell you start to finish to say, hey, we plan on being here on this day. We'll either bring the materials with us, or the materials are going to be delivered on this day. We're going to get up on your roof, or we're going to get under your house, or we're going to do your wiring, whatever it is they're doing. They should be able to articulate to you kind of what's the, what did your English teacher say? Thesis, topic, conclusion.
Right.
Intro, thesis, conclusion. Man, my English teacher's going to hunt me down. But at the end of the day, it's, how's the project going to start? What are you going to do while you do the project? And how are we going to be able to get that done? When I am most comfortable with somebody that's providing a service for me is when they explain exactly what they're going to do. And I'll warn anybody that ever calls my office or comes in my office, we are that type of insurance company. We're going to make sure that you don't walk out of there without knowing what we recommend.
Right.
And why.
Right. Oh yeah. I do estate sales, and we've been getting really, really good at explaining all of that. What are we going to do while we're in your house? Like well, out of here, and I didn't put this question on there, but I was thinking about it. We know roofs are a huge, probably I would say the number one claim that you would get.
That is the most common claim you're going to see.
What is the next most common?
Probably going to be some type of water damage related to freezes, or a lot of our homes are on clay and they shift around a little bit, so you'll have pipes break and those types of things. But yeah, by and large, it's going to be wind and hail. It's going to be your biggest thing, and it's not always just a roof. It could be windows, it could be siding, it could be autos. I had a commercial customer that has 2 vehicles they use for their business, and the storm that we had on the 8th damaged both of those vehicles. So both of those vehicles are going to have to go in the shop and get repaired.
Oh, that's terrible.
And the house was fine.
So, isn't that so bizarre? Yeah. They, and you didn't even think about, when was it? 2021, 2022 is when we had that big freeze. Yep. That's a huge problem. And pipes in North Texas are a big problem. Those, the clay is not easy to deal with. The expansion and the contraction. You see that a lot. So water would definitely. And then, so the other question I had was, I was just in Austin, so this kind of seems like a silly question because I know how dysfunctional our legislators are right now.
Not a legislator.
No. Have y'all heard anything that has been presented for help or changing the industry for the better?
Not recently. I know that there is a lot more reporting out there. There are two sites for anybody that's watching this, and I'm going to be talking about this tomorrow at Metro Tex as well. There are two sites I always recommend consumers go to. One of those is TDI.gov, which is Texas Department of Insurance.gov. They have a fantastic question and answers area, and they actually have videos if you like watching YouTubes. And it says, what happens if I have a claim? How can I do this? So they have some great, and usually they're 1 to 5 minute videos. They're not real long.
Mm-hmm.
There's another site when you're looking for insurance, and we all have done this, myself included. I go online, I do a little survey, says I'm interested in insurance. And for the next 15 days, you have 50 people calling you about insurance.
Yes.
And generally, after you talk to 2 or 3 agents, if it's not what you do for a living, it kind of all just blurs together.
Right.
There's another site called OPIC, and that is another state office. It's OPIC. If you type into that, it'll actually allow you to put 5 different carriers on there and it'll tell you generally what type of insurance that they cover.
Oh, wow.
One thing we didn't talk about here earlier, but specifically around home, most home policies are what they call named or open peril. So the difference between those two, for anybody that's on this call, you can look it up. Open peril means anything that we don't, or anything that happens to you that we haven't specifically said we don't cover, we have to cover. So there are there are a number of carriers out there that have what they call open peril, which basically means anything happens to your house, the only thing we're not going to cover is what's on this list. It's usually a much shorter list.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's another one that's called named peril, which means we only cover what we name, not everything that could happen.
Gotcha.
So it's a very important distinction for people to take a look at when they're doing this. Not to say either one of them is bad. You just want to make sure you understand the difference between those two.
So how often should people get, like if you have a home and you've just had a home for a long time, how often should people get quotes on their homeowners insurance?
Well, if you don't get quotes, I would at least encourage at least once a year, talk with your agent. We generally try to talk to our customers at least twice a year. We do, obviously when they do their policy and then when they have a renewal, but somewhere in between, we try to do a review with them. And generally what I try to do, and I'm not going to say we're 100% great at doing it with everybody, but generally what we try to do is reach out to them about 60 days before their renewal is coming up and saying, hey, have you made any changes on the house? You're a realtor, you know this.
Mm-hmm.
If I move into a house with laminate countertops, what's one of the first things I'm going to do?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to change the countertops.
Right.
Those countertops cost more. So I typically encourage people to do a review at least once a year on their coverages. And if you had a good understanding of it when you bought it, then you just have to ask your agent the opposite of what I would ask you. Has anything changed?
Mm-hmm.
And then I would say every 2 years, I think it's pretty healthy to go out and look around.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not threatened by that at all. I'm one of those, because I come out of a little bit of a retail background, I'm not bashful about telling somebody, hey, this is not a good deal for you.
Mm-hmm.
Because I want that customer for life.
Yeah.
I don't want them for this year or for this policy. So I want to make sure that I'm doing my best to protect them and that they have reasonable amount of coverage for what they need. So I would say if you have not looked around in the last couple of years, I would definitely right now I'd be looking because we saw what the rates looked like over the last few years. A lot of carriers had really large increases over the last couple of years that may or may not have been within their control just because of costs and labor and everything we talked about before. But this year, we're actually seeing where it's kind of plateaued. I'm not necessarily saying it's going down, but we're not seeing 20%, 30% increases year over year very commonly right now.
Wow.
So there are, I've had people ask me, wow, last year was really tough. The year before it was really tough. How'd you guys do? And I said, well, this year is fantastic because it's making everybody look because unfortunately, because of the prices, almost all of us out of an abundance of caution need to go out and take a look and see, hey, am I still getting the coverage I think I'm getting? And is there a better rate for those coverages?
Right. Yeah. And I did a video just the other day about deferred maintenance. Like you were talking about just doing things to make sure that you're taking care of your house. Mm-hmm. I mean, I took out a tree. I guess it was probably in November. I had a branch that fell, barely missed my roof.
Dodged the bullet.
I dodged the bullet, but it did hit the gutter.
Yeah.
Now the gutters already needed to be replaced anyways, but it bent, and that's the worst I got, except that it landed on my neighbor's shed. Now it was a metal shed. We were able to pop it out, but I decided I was going to go ahead and take that tree out because it was just one of these old junk trees that just fall apart when they get to a certain year. And boy, am I glad that I spent that money. I mean, it was $1,900. I was glad to do it because my tree was huge and those guys watching them terrifies me, but they can do it. They can climb up there and use a chainsaw and do all those things. But after the wind of the spring, it's like, I am so glad that I took that tree out, because it would have just destroyed so many other things. And I think sometimes people really do put off that deferred maintenance. And right now, if you're selling a home, if you're thinking about selling a home, deferred maintenance is a huge problem. And especially if you've had somebody that's lived in that house for a long time, like I see where it's people that have lived there for 40 years and now they've gotten into their 90s and they just can't see that they have a crack in the wall because their vision has whatever the reason.
I've stepped over that crack on the sidewalk for the last 10 years. It doesn't exist. I know it's there. But
Exactly. You get used to all these things.
And that actually kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, too, when you talk about managing the cost of insurance. You're not my customer, so I don't know what your coverages are in your home, and I don't know what your deductibles are. But if it costs you $1,900 to remove that tree, it probably would cost you at least double that to repair your roof if the tree fell on your roof.
That's right.
For your deductible. So it's a very smart way to look at it.
And my neighbors, because that tree bent over into someone else's yard.
And it's your responsibility to maintain.
And it is my responsibility. And I did not want to have to do that.
So, yeah, I would tell people that everybody likes their hacks, right? So the best hack you can do on your home right now is walk around the edge of your house and look straight up. If anything's between you and the sky, your roof is in danger.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't necessarily mean it's got to be removed, but just make sure you understand what it is. Sometimes you can just trim a tree back. And I just, I'm an insurance person, so I tend to think about that too, but it's kind of weird. I usually 2 or 3 times a year kind of walk around the property and go, well, I really haven't insulated that pipe in a while, so I'll make a list.
Yes.
I'm not saying I get that list always done, but at least I make the list.
Yes.
But what I do almost every time I do that is I find something, because I go, oh man, if that happened badly,
yes,
it would be really bad.
Yes. So cleaning out your gutters, stuff like that. It's, with foundation work, that water, taking care of your water and the drainage in your house is a huge deal. That's why we have gutters.
Well, and the cool thing is now, whether it's a roofer, a heating and air conditioning company, electrician company, almost all of them now, the reputable companies offer a maintenance program. So, it's like we're not rural, but we're a little bit out of town. So we have a septic system, not regular plumbing. I pay an annual service maintenance for the septic company, but I also pay the same thing for my HVAC and everything. So they come out twice a year, mainly because I'm probably too lazy to get up in the attic and it's too hot in August to switch out a filter anyways. But for a couple $100 a year, you can mitigate a lot of risk by having a professional go out and do those maintenance programs.
Absolutely. And they keep track of the calendar for you, because it's amazing how fast a year can go by and you don't even realize it.
Yeah.
And I don't have I live in a historic home, so I don't have central heat and air, which is bizarre, but it has kept me really, I keep track of all my filters way more than I probably would, because I see them. I don't see an HVAC, you don't see. So yeah, definitely. If you are, and as a realtor, I'm telling you this, if you're thinking about selling your house, deferred maintenance, you need to be thinking about that. Yeah. And because buyers are being real picky right now, they can ask for a lot of stuff. So.
And I am not a realtor, but I also tell you that probably one of the best things you can do if you're a seller is go pay your own home inspector to come out and look at your house before you start talking to anybody else.
That's very true.
Because now you have a document.
That's right.
Because we've been in our house since 2016. I used to transfer around because of being in corporate America, so I've lived in and out of a lot of houses. If my wife was here, she'd punch me in the shoulder because she's hated it every time we move. I don't blame her. But one of the things that I've learned is anytime I step into a house, if I'm leaving that house, it's acceptable to me because I've lived in it in the last several years.
That's right.
But if you walk into my house, you're looking at it with a different set of eyeballs.
That's right. And 5 years ago, people would walk in and see aesthetics. Now what they're walking in and see is foundational, structural stuff. Mm-hmm. That is the shift in the last year for buyers. It's like they walk in and they see every crack. They see every roof pitch it looks dark. That's a dark spot, Mm-hmm. I'm seeing people send cameras down pipes now. I've never seen them in just a regular option period do that for no reason. Yep. I've had it happen twice now. So they're really concerned about all these maintenance items and making sure that they can get coverage for insurance and that it's not going to cost them an arm and a leg. So if you're a seller, don't spend the money on shiplap. spend the money making sure your house has had maintenance on it.
I am not going to touch shiplap with a 10-foot pole. That's going to be that one.
Oh, HGTV, how it has ruined the real estate. No, I'm just kidding.
But no, I think, just like the weather guys and gals tell you, just be aware. I mean, understand, walk through your house. And when I used to work in retail, when we were walking a store and looking for opportunity, one of my bosses, the best thing he ever did is he said, I want you to walk in through the back of the store. Don't walk in through the front of the store.
Interesting.
The store will look totally different.
That's right.
Because
it changes everything.
I know where my bananas are that my wife likes. I know where the mangoes are that I like. And those are the two places that we go to right away.
That's right.
But by looking at just taking a different path and not getting emotional, licensed home inspectors are some of the best people in the world because they will go and tell you things that you probably don't want to know.
That's right. Well, tell people where they can find you if they want to talk to you more.
Best way to get a hold of me is I have an active website. It is thefordagencytx.com. We tried to make it as interactive as possible. Don't hate on me because I'm 60 years old, so it's not quite as up to date as a lot of websites. But we do actually have a number of spaces on that website where you can click on it. It says, can I add somebody to my policy? And it just tells you the difference on what that might end up happening, or should I do a claim, those types of things. And we do have chat and AI attached into it. So if you have simple questions, it'll try to answer the questions for you. And if it can't, it'll refer you to my office. As we said, my office is here in Grand Prairie. We're on South Carrier Parkway. So if anybody knows Grand Prairie well, I'm 2 doors down from Good Day Cafe on South Carrier.
Aha. Yes.
And our office number is 817-766-6044.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for taking your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Jenna Pecor is a Realtor with Bancroft Realty and a proud member of the Arlington Board of Realtors. She's been helping people with their real estate goals since